Firstly, then, thank you so much for coming here, taking the time out to do this as well.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always quite nice to be like, someone says, I want to hear you speak. It's like, really? Okay.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Glad you feel that way. We as well feel a similar way. We're glad you're here to, speak your mind. And yeah, I'm sure we'll have a lot of nuggets that we can send out. So I guess the very first thing I'd like to start off with is I'd like to learn a little bit more about you. So how'd you start your career? How'd you get to where you are?
Definitely not a straight line, a rather circuitous route. And this is one of the things that whenever I'm sort of talking to any of grads in any profession, it's like, don't expect to have a linear career because you shouldn't. And it is more about building the breadth of experience, and that breadth of experience should take you ready to the next level. So started out life as a secondary school PE teacher in southeast London, and doing PE and science, and you've really got to like other people's teenagers. And turns out I didn't really like the teenagers I was responsible for. And I think education is one of those interesting aspects. I still fundamentally feel very passionate about the value and the importance of education, and you'll hear me possibly talk about it later. But not everybody values education equally. And one of the things that I found in the schools that I was teaching in is that it's hard to be the only person that really cares about that particular child's education. If they don't care, their parents don't care, their friends don't care, and so why am I the only person that cared? So in those sorts of scenarios where it was pretty rough schools, high levels of deprivation, high levels of immigration, high levels of multicultural, high levels of English as a first language, significant underfunding, as you often find in many of these situations. It just got a bit too hard, really. So then it was a case of, look, I would just need another job that gets me out of this and into something else. And I was so fortunate, landed on my feet at Pfizer, the pharmaceuticals company that everyone now knows very well because of the vaccine. But when I first joined Pfizer back in, I think it was 2000, around about then, Pfizer was famous for the little blue pill at the time.
Yeah.
And so my role was as a sales exec. So I have I'm a classically trained salesperson, which has definitely stood me in good stead all the way through, selling 3 products, one of which was Viagra, which led to quite interesting, conversations when you go out. What do you do? Oh, you work for Pfizer. Oh, don't they sell? Yes. Do you sell? Yes. Does it work? It's like, well, that's a whole other conversation. Yes, it does. The clinical evidence is quite significant. But yeah, that was an interesting time. It was really good because what it did give me is the real depth and understanding of evidence-based decision making. Here's the data, here's the pros and cons of that, here's the considerations. So therefore, we can say this. It's literally the what, so what, now what approach, which has definitely stood me in good stead throughout the rest of my career. So from sales, and then moved into sales training. That was a very straightforward leap to do. Then it was a case of looking for what's next. Didn't really want to go back out into the sales and become a sales manager. Really liked being in the office space. Didn't really want to go into marketing. Not sure what's next. So that's when I picked up a master's in HR strategy and change. Again, it's look back at those decisions you make and go like, oh, that was very smart, because change is one of those massive constants, and having that real depth of knowledge around the body of knowledge for change is something that I think stands me in good stead. Did a bit of a Salesforce effectiveness role before coming to New Zealand in 2006. So I've been here for 18 years. Here is my home. Kids are born here. I'm a Kiwi. I am a Kiwi. I took the citizenship piece. So fully invested in New Zealand Inc. First role in New Zealand in 2006 was literally across the road at Lion. When Lion was based here in Carlton Gore Road. So it was almost like coming back to the future. Really interesting organisation, still very fond memories of it to this day. Having moved from drugs to alcohol was, again, one of those interesting conversations you have with people. Great organisation, great culture, great leadership, great brands, and really, again, reinforced that sort of blue chip element of how good organisations can and could be. Then after that, sort of started broadening out, moving away from sales training, sales capability into broader capability. That's when I was picked up a role at Yellow. Really interesting time in that organisation's cycle, because it was really starting to pivot away from being effectively a print media to a digital media. I know you had Tracy Taylor also on your podcast, and at that time we were still trying to defend print as whilst trying to grow digital capability. So it's interesting sort of being in an organisation at that sigmoid curve inflection of still trying to hold on to the past revenue stream while standing up a new revenue stream. And at the same time, it was about the culture, the leadership, the ways of working, all those sorts of things. So I really got a breadth there. And then after that, consulting for a few years, then into Air New Zealand, sort of again quite a broad portfolio before landing at my current employer so joined Fonterra in 2017.
Oh, nice. So it's been 5+ years.
It's almost coming up 7 years later this year.
Oh, wow. That's a long time. Okay.
No, it is in Fonterra years, yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah. That's quite a bit of a journey. It's interesting that you mentioned yellow, because they're still very much reliant on their print revenue to this day. That's kind of like an example of how, I don't think it's Tracy's fault or anything, but it's just hard or difficult for a company to rebrand and just completely change.
Yeah.
But having said that, one of the key things that I was discussing with Tracy when I was talking to her in 2021 was the tech talent shortage. And that's something which is very much reality today as well. And you're quite passionate about speaking about the broken pipeline.
Yeah.
I guess from your perspective, what do you think is going on?
Well, I think it is strategic workforce planning at a national level that I think we need to do a better job of joining up all parts of the pipeline. So if you begin with the end in mind of the roles that industry needs, and then you go right back to the start of the pipeline of, where do those pipelines begin? It's, the kids in schools, what are they, what sort of qualifications of the teachers do they have? Do they have inspiring teachers that really turn them on to? And you don't necessarily need to learn coding these days because large language models, synthetically generated data, you actually don't need to code. But it is that interest in technology and the use cases and how you can apply that I think we do need a really good base of teachers to inspire and really get people excited about. And then you think about, you go from primary schools through to secondary schools, and you've got choices that kids make at the age of 10 or 11. And I have a 15-year-old son, and he's recently made some choices, for year 11, year 12, and then he's choosing to go through either NCA pathway or international baccalaureate pathway. And so again, it's really important to make sure that the people advising these 15 and 16-year-olds about what they're going to do are again linked into industry and the roles that these qualifications that they're choosing at 15 or 16 and where that will take them. I remember sitting in sort of a bit of a hall, and one of the people were talking about career choices, yada yada, and they said, we have quite a large proportion of our year 13 students leave our school, go to university and do a BCom. And I just a little bit of me died inside. Because one of the things that we're looking at, there's about 12,000 students studying a BCom at any one time, another further 5,000 doing accountancy, like 11,000 odd doing law. But what we don't have is that workforce planning in terms of, how many lawyers, accountants, business people do we actually need? How many jobs do we have coming out of university? And it goes back to that fundamental principle, what are universities Therefore, yes, it is about education and that depth of knowledge, but also it's about creating people that can go into the workforce where there are jobs that are needed for them. And so one of the things I am really passionate about is looking at, we know that we've got high immigration. So last year, 137,000 people came in, and that's net, not gross, net gain of 137,000 people. And then when you look at that breakdown, look at the skills on the green list, which is basically the qualifications and jobs that drive immigration visas. And then you go like, how many of them have got things like IT, health, education, engineering, those sorts of things, versus how many food technology, that's another one, versus how many lawyers, accountants. There's only one role on the green list that has a BCom background, and that's procurement. All others are about that engineering, science, tech, etc. space. And so no wonder our immigration is so high when we haven't really got that pipeline of places and fees and allocations and career guidance coming through to that, feeding into that universities piece lined up. One of the things I would love to see is careers advisors in schools actually engaging with industry, and the other side of that, industry engaging with schools and saying, hey, these are the things that these are the roles that we are looking for and really struggling to hire. These are the sorts of qualifications and courses you need to be picking at, year 11, year 12. These are the sorts of courses that we know that we can place you in. Where if you come out of university, from an organisation perspective, engineering, when we go to market for grads, each one of the engineer students that we want to offer, they've usually got 3 other offers on the table.
Yep.
Compare that to a lawyer, a law grad. They are literally taking low salaries. There's usually about a 20k difference between a law grad and an engineering grad in their starting salaries, simply because of supply and demand.
Yep.
And so I think we need to go right back and look at that pathway all the way through from primary school to secondary school and careers advisory, places at university, fees, structures, those sorts of things. I'm not saying about lowering standards, because you need certain educational standards to be able to do the course. Yep. But you can certainly make certain courses more attractive and easier to get into because there's more places linked to the actual workforce that New Zealand needs. There was a really interesting report that I read that basically said that, from an IT perspective, industry, so we've got enough, I think we've pretty much got a reasonable amount of IT grads coming through, but what we don't have is grad roles in industry. And so again, it's looking at all parts of the pathway, because otherwise we're just going to lose them. They're just going to go offshore. And then what we are then going to have to do later on is hire in the skill sets and the capabilities that we've lost later on. So it's line it up on a national level from a strategic workforce plan. And that way we don't have to rely on immigration. I'm not saying that immigration is bad. It brings a lot into the country. And I sit here as an immigrant myself. But there are other issues that come with high levels of immigration. So, for example, of that 137,000 net gain, there are about 45,000 of which were aged between 0 and 19. So that's a huge amount, 45,000 people into the preschool and school infrastructure. We just don't have that capacity sitting there idling to suddenly turn on an extra 45,000 places in schools. We don't have the classrooms. We certainly don't have the teachers. Yeah. We don't have the infrastructure in health, in housing, to suddenly absorb that, even just that in that, 0 to 19 education sector. We just don't have the capacity to turn it on at short notice.
Yep. Two things you've mentioned there is that we do have a problem with, I guess, your younger generation not studying or want to go into a software or any tech type of role, engineering type of role. But at the same time, we've also, in New Zealand, lack a lot of those junior opportunities. How do we balance the act?
Again, this is where I think we do need to take a joined up national view. I mean, because the pipeline itself is so piecemeal, so there's 8 universities and they're operating independently pretty much of each other, and they've got their KPIs to hit, and there's obviously funding from the Tertiary Education Commission, and there's also their success metrics are basically about the number of academic papers that are published and their how many of their students go into roles. Those are the 2 big metrics. But what we're not doing in terms of saying, okay, nationally, we need X number of these students, Y number of these students, and Z number of these students, and then helping them transition from university into organisations. And I think organisations then also need to look at their own workforce planning of so how many junior entry level grad roles do we need? How many programs do we need? Again, the 2 aren't the same. And then what's that career pathway internally that we also need to build? And it's just that sort of that talent pipeline maturity piece. But then let's not forgetting right back at the start of the pipeline, we need teachers who are equipped and skilled and excitable and excited about tech or STEM or STEAM subjects. And again, if you're an engineering grad or an IT grad and you've got a choice of earning X in industry or Y as a teacher, and I say this as a former teacher, part of the reason why I left is that I was living in London. I just couldn't afford it anymore. I had my student debt to pay. Living in London is one of the most expensive cities in the world, as is Auckland. And again, it gets to a simple case of, I want to do this role. This role is so important and so vital, but I just can't afford it. And it's really hard work. And you kind of go, reasons to stay, reasons to go. The balance for me back in London in those days, and I was a PE and science teacher, it was really difficult to kind of make the things add up. Go right back to schools. It's a similar situation of you can earn X as a teacher, you can earn Y in industry, but crikey, don't we need great teachers? You know, one of the things that makes an organisation successful is their leaders. One of the things that makes a country great is its teachers. How are we making sure that that as a profession is pitched in the same way that some European countries, you know, oh, you're a teacher, you are a professor, you are, you know, may play such an important role, and I fear that we don't have the same level of value given to that role.
What do you think Europe are doing that we're not, and what could we start doing?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think there are many things. So it's more often the Scandinavian countries. It is a value that teaching and education in schools have placed on them. They've also got a very well developed apprentice program. So again, in New Zealand, and changing more so in the UK and in other markets. But in New Zealand, you've kind of got that sort of 16-year-old, year 11, year 12. You know, the smart kids go to university. The less smart kids go to apprenticeships. And it's like, okay, that's just not true anymore.
Yeah.
It's kind of like not all kids should go to university. Certainly they shouldn't go, you know, we've got an oversupply of certain degrees. There's no question about that. And there's data from the OECD that 100% confirms that. Just a couple of stats, if I may.
Let's do it.
So there's a piece of data that I found. So New Zealand has got one of the highest level of qualification to role mismatches in the OECD. So we've got 14% of our population have got lower qualifications on their job that they do, but 40% have got a higher job than the qualification that they hold. Effectively, they're overqualified for the job that they're doing. Pulling that apart of that 40%, you know, which particular qualifications. So almost half of that have got qualifications in society and culture or management and commerce. Basically, it's your BComs, it's your sociology, those sorts of courses. You know, you go and study it because you're passionate and you enjoy it, but there aren't the jobs following on from that people can go into. You look at industry places, you look at industry courses, and this is why you've got sort of overqualified people going into those underqualified roles. And so again, it is trying to join that pipeline all the way through that makes life a lot more seamless and effective. I'm not sure if I've answered your question fully, but I kind of want to know.
You did. You actually also brought me to another point. So I was just talking to one of my 22 or 21-year-old cousin sisters. So she's just finished her uni. And her loan is approximately $35,000. And the way that they rip it off is 12.5% after a certain, salary that you make. Generally, whoever graduates, they do have to do that. So she got offered a job here in New Zealand for 70, but she got offered one for 110 over in Australia.
Yep.
And what's interesting is that they don't deduct your student loan. So you can go invest it and do that until you come back. Yes, slightly, well, I wouldn't call it shady, it's just the way that New Zealand government have made it. Yeah. When she lands back, she'll obviously have to pay for it, which she will. But that just allows her to begin her investment journey to us and within herself and then other places as well. And so she's chosen to go overseas for that very reason.
Can't blame her.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one other point here is that how do you think we can make New Zealand attractive to our own people, but not just our own people, but also skilled people from overseas as well?
Yeah. Well, at the point that I made earlier about places and fees, if we have a shortage of X qualifications, then why don't we make them cheaper? So, for example, if you're going to do an engineering degree, it is more expensive than a law or a BCom. So also engineers do 4 years versus 3 years. So I'm all right with them doing an extra fourth year because you have got that depth of qualification requirements. But again, if we've got a shortage of engineers, which we do, then why don't we actually play around with the fee structure to make it more appealing? And that way you've then got kids leaving university with less student debt, and then they're able to go into the roles that they want to go into and they feel that they can stay because they haven't got 35, 40Ks worth of debt. They've got 10 or 15, which then becomes a much more manageable chunk. Look, there's, I think the salary disparity between Australia and New Zealand, that's a bigger piece of sort of nationwide issues to deal with. Our productivity gaps, it's all those sorts of things. But there are certain things that we can do quite quickly and relatively easily around the fee places, the structuring. I know that they've done sort of fees free for various different nursing to actually get people in. Well, why don't we do that from some of the other ones that we're also struggling to fill? make that student debt at least seem serviceable and manageable, so that people don't feel they have to go offshore to just even make a dent into it.
A strong point there, I guess, about fees. But I guess one thing I want to touch on, this is probably most of the audience that we have, that we're listening to it and going, all right, what can we do today to, I guess, make the situation better right now? And then, of course, in the future as well, with not such a, I guess, I would say this is a 5 to 10 year view. But I guess like within less to 5 years, what would you suggest to startups right now that have their tech companies?
Yeah, well, one of the pieces I did for a grad strategy was take a sort of global look at the global graduate population. And so, a couple of sort of macro global trends. So we know that overall the world's middle class is growing, improvements in, lives such as India, China, where the big populations are. So when the world's middle class is growing, they want two things. They want better food, or they want several things, but they want better food. So we know that, increased demands on nutrition are there. But the other thing that the world's middle class do is they invest in education for their young people. So as the demand for increased food is improving, so too is the demand for increased education. So they send their young people to university. So globally, the grad population is growing. But what's happening in New Zealand, between 1996 and 2008, there was a bit of a baby boom. Post 2008, and you forecast that out to 2030, the overarching baby production rate, births per woman, has dropped by about a third. So fast forward that to 2030, when the last of the 2008 boom are heading the workforce, they'll be about 22, and my son was born in 2008, so got a real live experience of that.
Yes.
You then have to be, so although we're already struggling for certain grads in the marketplace, and particularly STEM are very much in demand. For example, when we've gone to offer for grads on some engineering programs, for each one grad that we've been offered, they've had 3 offers on the table, and we've had to really be the most competitive to secure them. Going forwards, New Zealand organisations have to really think about 2 things. Number one, how are they going to compete for the shrinking pool of grads going forwards? And then the second piece is like, well, how do we actually look offshore for some of the overseas courses? You've got this massive boom in graduates elsewhere, new courses, new study profiles, new ways of learning occurring offshore. And how do we attract them into New Zealand, into either our grad programs or our organisations? And so I think, what can be done now, I think it's being crystal clear about what's the workforce that you're going to need. I love the Chinese proverb, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time is today. So if you haven't done a bit of even a thumbsuck of workforce plan, given that broadly it takes about 5 years to really lift a capability for a specific workforce, what's a workforce that you need to be building now for the next 5 years? Start investing in it. Don't leave it, because you can't buy certain talent on the spot market. You just can't. So you think about that IT, that tech, that data and analytics, the embracing of AI. You just can't buy that on the spot market. Start building it now. Also have a multi-channel approach. This is what I need to build. This is what I need to buy. This is where I need to source offshore. This is how I need to make my organisation attractive for people to want to come and join, because they are going to have choices. So it is that sort of build your workforce plan early and then start picking pieces off so that you can be that attractive employer.
No, it makes sense. And I can, see that working quite well. I guess internal L&D is very important. And like you mentioned, offshore courses, or even the way that they're doing it. They may be doing, I'm not aware of it. It's just an assumption. In other countries, we've also got to consider that how fast technology is growing. So say, for example, React, JS, or Flutter, they're all new technologies. They've only been around for 4 or 5 years. Oh, not 4 or 5 years, about 7 to 8 years, but relatively new. So your rate of change, obviously, in learning technology has to be there as well. Not have to be there, but rather you've got to be open to that as well. So constantly learning is something which I feel is a part of it.
And that's a really good point, actually. I'm just trying to see if I've got the stat here in my notes. Oh, it's in something else. So, we've spent a lot of time talking so far about the grad population, the pipeline coming in. But let's not forget we've got a massive pipeline, or a massive existing workforce population. We've got 5-6 generations in the workforce as people are living longer and therefore working longer, because we've got longer health spans, not just lifespans. We don't have a retirement age in New Zealand, so people are choosing to work for longer because they can. And so it's a case of, well, how do you take the existing workforce that you've currently got and upskill in current technology that we need to? I saw a posting a couple of months ago, and I sort of reposted it on LinkedIn. The Singaporean government, and Singapore, look, they do some fantastic things. So they are giving everybody over the age of 40 the chance to go back to university and do a diploma. So, because it's been 20 years since you've been at university, things have changed.
Yeah.
So for anybody over the age of 40, you can go back to university free of charge and do a diploma. And so you get that double hit benefit. You get, people over 40, I am one of those. I'll talk about my own study in a minute. Back at university, really giving their own skills a boost. And you get that additional benefit of multi-generational learning side by side.
Yeah.
So you've got the young people learning from the elder, the older, more experienced workplace-based learning. And that's one of the things that we do struggle with when grads first enter, or even young people first enter the workforce. There's a really big transition of getting them work ready, whether they've come from apprenticeships. Actually, apprenticeships are really good. Because it's that whole earn while you learn. So you don't have that sudden, I was a grad at university, now next day I'm at work. Holy moly, the world is quite different. Apprenticeships are a beautiful transition into that world of work. Earn while you learn. You don't get that student debt to anywhere near the same extent that students do. And they're work ready. They're awesome. So honestly, if anyone's on the fence about university or apprenticeship, do an apprenticeship. They're so good. The other thing I was going to mention, you asked earlier about what is it that Europe do that New Zealand doesn't necessarily. In Europe, they've got something called degree apprenticeships. You may have come across them. Same concept of apprenticeship being earn while you learn.
Right.
But instead of going up to a level 3, 4 or 5 that we do in New Zealand, they actually go all the way up to degree level, even postgraduate as well. Wow. So typical university course is like 2 to 3 years. In the UK, it extends out to 5 years because you've got that workplace element as well as the academic element. And so you do block release courses, so you still get hit doing all those academic requirements. And then you go and do your sort of, a term at work, block release at university. And so you've really got that learn, apply. So you don't have that sudden massive shift of adjustments of coming out of university, going into work, having a big culture shock of like, what do you mean I've got to get up every day? What do you mean I've got to sort of, put clothes on? One of our grads did ask us like, oh, the surf's looking really good, like tomorrow afternoon. Like, can I take the afternoon off? Like, no. You're paid for Monday to Friday. You need to be at work Monday to Friday. Surfing's one of those things you now do outside of work. It's those simple questions that they've always been able to go surfing at 11 o'clock on a Thursday morning because they've been able to. Sure, I can ditch my lectures. Not so much in a world of work. Bless them.
Yeah, that's one. I mean, I guess the other thing though, this is one thing we practice at Pickaway, and I mean, it might be abnormal. We do, and we're pretty flexible. What we like with everyone, and this is what Arwen's been doing quite recently, is because he lives over in Western. Our office is actually in Flatbush, so he likes to dodge traffic. So he will work 2 hours at home from 9, then come through 11 a.m., have 4 hours overlap with all of us together, and then go back. And then some days you're able to be flexible with certain things. As an EVP, because how you just mentioned right now that call it Gen Z. They're the ones that are about to come to the workforce and already have started as well.
Yeah. I remember that most of these have had 2 to 3 years of studying during COVID.
So work from,
Massive impact on those experiences that they've had.
Absolutely, and not just that, used to being at home and doing all that. Do you think, and I'm not sure whether this is valid, but do you think that could be an EVP that New Zealand companies could sort of give? Because there's a trade-off with remote work as well. There
is, and I think one size does not fit all. And I think that first and foremost, each organisation needs to be clear about what do we need to do to deliver two things: our goals and our EVP. So first things first is no one person is bigger than the organisation. No organisation, you have to kind of really think about what the organisation is set up to do, and how does the work need to get done. It's not about the people, but it's literally how does the work need to get done. I think the other piece is there is so much that can be gained from just those sitting next to somebody. There's also the sense of culture of belonging. You know, when we've had some of our interns, they talk about the sense of pride when they have that swipe card and you put that swipe card on the gate and the gate's open for you and almost like absorb you into this culture, this organisation. You have that sense of belonging that you just don't get when you're at home.
Yeah.
And when you look at some of the global trends, there's a really good PwC survey called The Hopes and Fears of the Workforce. And I love that because it really is, you know, it's not just like workforce planning and, you know, the great resignation that was a couple of years ago, but where we really talked about what are the hopes and fears of the workforce right here, right now. They talk about the sense of purpose, the need for belonging, the need for connection. We know that we've got a mental health crisis.
Yeah.
And so what is the role that organisations play in supporting people through these difficult times? You know, you would have heard the acronym BANI, B-A-N-I, brittle, anxious, nervous, insecure. That's what people are feeling right now. So what is the role that organisations play in helping address that? You know, how do we stop people feeling brittle, anxious, nervous and insecure in the workplace? To what extent is that, you know, where is that sweet spot in flexibility versus belonging and safety and wraparound and, you know, just someone walking into the office going, how are you today? You okay? You know, I know you well enough to know that something's come on, let's sit down, let's have a cup of tea, let's have a coffee. Let me give you a good listening to. And, you know, it's hard to do online. Interestingly, back in 2004, way before all the technology boom that we had, my thesis then for my HR Strategy and Change Masters was the role of the remote line manager in leading organisational change based on the workforce that I was in at the time, which was Pfizer. So when I was at Pfizer, we're all field-based. I had to live on territory. I saw my manager once every 6 weeks. He'd phone me like most days, how you doing?
Right.
But in terms of eyeballing me, he only saw me sort of once every 4 to 6 weeks. And one of the things when you're trying to lead change, you know, you need to eyeball someone. You need to kind of like, are you okay? Because it's easy to hide on a phone. It's easy to hide in a Teams call because they're seeing you from here up. You might be literally still in your pajamas, but, you know, dressed from here up. And if people want to do that, that's fine. But it's the whole, that's not normal for you, you know. And so the ability to really just see the whole person, to sense when something's on or off with them, to be able to walk towards them and just have that quiet check-in, because it's really easy to hide behind a Teams screen or a Zoom screen. And I think the role of leadership is harder because we have got that tyranny of distance. It's not impossible, and you know, great leaders do manage to connect, and they find several different ways. And I've led remote teams. You know, I've had situations where I only physically saw my team members twice a year, but I worked so hard on connecting, on knowing them, bridging that gap, so I could tell, even through a team screen, like, okay, something's not okay with you, tell me, I'm listening. And again, it's just an additional requirement on leaders these days to check that they are okay, because we have got a responsibility to make sure that they are learning, growing, healthy, happily fulfilled, achieving their purpose. You know, it's a different set of expectations in the workforce.
Absolutely. That extra effort that you're talking about when it comes to, I guess, leading those remote teams and also building that rapport, that connection. What does that look like?
Yeah, good question. And I think it's very individual down to the two people involved. I can only talk about what I do as a leader. First things first, you just get to know the person. Like, who are you? What's important to you? What drives you? Tell me about your values. Tell me about your background. Tell me what you think I need to know. What sort of leader do you need me to be for you? Because I don't know about you, but I'm not very good at mind reading. So it's one of those, I'm pretty pants at it. That's a UK term. So it's a case of tell me what you think I need to know. How do I get the best out of you? What are your hot buttons? What are your cold buttons? Like, these are our deliverables, and my job is to help you deliver that and to thrive and succeed in all those, you know, those good juju that you feel when you're delivering and performing well. How do I do that? Because each person is different, you know, as much as our DNA, our personality, our style, etc. Everyone's different. So I think as a leader, know your people, know their hot buttons, know their cold buttons, and then it's about having that range of like, for that person, I need to do that. But if I did that for that person, they're going to go, get away from me,
Yep.
you know? So it is take the time to know your people, what drives them, motivates them, and then tailor it, particularly more so when you're behind a screen. And it's little things like know the name of their significant others, their pets, their families. How's your niece doing? How's your dog doing? How's your cat? I heard they weren't very well. What happened at the weekend? So take the time to chat, to connect, to know them, so that when you are looking at them, you kind of go, something's not right. And they go, well, yeah, actually my dog died over the weekend. It's like, oh no, like, look, take the time. You don't need to be here. And they remember when you're having those tough moments, they remember how you treated them. I had a team member who lost both her parents within 12 months. You know, she was older. She was late 40s, early 50s, but it's still losing both parents within the space of 12 months. And it's a case of, look, right now my focus is you. Work will always be there. Do what you need to do. If you want some distraction, work's there. If you need to take some time off, take some time off. Gave her that space to grieve, that space to be. And 6 months later, you know, after she'd kind of got through that second shock, she just said to me, thank you for giving me, holding the space. I will never forget how you treated me. And she repaid me tenfold in loyalty, in work, in effort, in input. It's the long game. It's you know, care enough about that person to know what's important to them and to give them what they need as much as you possibly can. But there's always things you can't do. I want to do this. It's like, I'm sorry, that's just not going to work. But what can I do instead?
Yeah. And I like how there's one thing I tell our HR admins or assistants is to always be conscious about what you're doing, in the sense that, like, yes, there's a formula, there's a bit of processes that we follow, but don't just follow it like you would a university course. Like, actually think about what you're doing, who you're speaking to, and why you're saying what you're saying. I guess for those people who, you know, I feel like everyone has their own personality type, which is obviously how it is. But there are some people who are quite machinery. They want to just follow certain formulas and processes. If you were to, I guess, lead a person like that in your team, how would you go about doing that?
I will answer your question just 1 second, but if I take a step back, when we think about organisations and workplaces and career paths, I think organisations probably need to have dual career pathways. Some people are amazing technical experts. Some people are amazing leaders. Some people are good at both. But one of the things that we have a lot of is people that are technical experts that have been forced to become a leader because that's how they get career progression. And I think one of the things that organisations do need to look at is how do you build career pathways for both, so that you've got the right people doing the right thing. So if you've got an amazing technical expert, great, let them be their best. Don't ask them to be a leader, because sometimes it's just asking too much of them. It's always that, you know, if you think about bell-shaped curve of normal distribution, if you think of that midpoint, if you've got an extreme something, even to get to that midpoint, they're going to have to travel a lot of distance to get there, and it's going to be exhausting for them. Versus if you've got somebody that naturally does something, then it's effortless for them. So play to people's strengths as much as possible. So that's kind of like a bit of a step back.
I guess they either need a clear picture of what they need to be doing, and they're very robotic about it. It's like they'll do what they need to perfectly. But then when you ask them to go a little bit outside of the box or just maneuver a bit, they struggle to.
And I think it comes back to the why, the how, the what. I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek. You know, his philosophy is start with why, start with the big picture, so that people understand that overarching direction of travel, the purpose, the backstory. You know, here's why we're doing this. Okay, here's how I think we need to achieve this. So therefore, what needs to happen is X, Y, and Z. So it is stepping through from the big picture down to the specificities. Clearly, where we've got a lot of you know, variability in the ability to co-design together is in that how and what. So where you've got somebody that is sort of more formulaic and likes things like things to be decided, versus somebody else that's much more tolerant of ambiguity.
Mm.
And we need different styles, certain roles, certain tasks. Some, if you've got a project manager has got executions to deliver and they're really sort of loosey-goosey with ambiguity, they're probably not going to be successful. So again, it's first about finding the right role for the right person, the right skill sets, making sure that you're not actually asking a left-handed person to be a right-handed person and vice versa, making sure it's not too big of an ask. Of course, people can learn and grow and change and stretch, but make sure it's comfort zone, learning zone, danger zone. Get people in their learning zone, but not their danger zone. So I think it's, fitting the soil to the seed and going like, yep, that's a good stretch and growth piece. And then secondly, it is stepping them through that why, how, what. And at the same time, okay, so these are the goals that we need to achieve. Right, let's work together. How do you think we should achieve them? Let me give you a good listening to, a good space to step me through your thinking. And then we can check and adjust on that thinking. Because one of the things that they may either want or really not like, and this goes back to an earlier point of get to know your people.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a task. How do you want to work on that task together? Would you like me to tell you what I think, or do you want to work it through yourself? And again, it depends on where they are from a maturity perspective, from a career growth perspective. Some people are like, no, don't tell me. I want to work this through myself. I went, sweet, okay. So here's a task. Come back to me in a week's time or whatever time you feel is suitable with your plan, and we'll and step me through that. Versus other people are like, no, just tell me right now. Okay, cool. Here's how I would approach that. Build and adjust as we go. And then it's a case of adjusting as you go in terms of, it's a little bit like a dance. Sometimes you need to step forward. Sometimes you need to step back. Yeah. And it's making sure that you are both stepping forward and back at the same time. Otherwise that happens or that happens. Yep. And again, that's when relationships, work start to go a little bit off track.
Great analogy. Super great analogy. In saying that, stat from NZ Tech report 2023, produced out in August. New Zealanders work longer compared to other OECD countries. Yep. So it's about 34.2 hours per week here, 31.9 hours per week in other countries. New Zealanders produce less, $68 out per hour.
I know that report. I cited that report in my master's thesis.
Oh, there we go, yeah.
Yep.
So, straight up question.
Yes.
What are we doing wrong?
I almost feel that is a question that I'm not qualified to answer. There's a whole productivity commission that's been set up. I think that was set up in 2011. Around about then, don't quote me on that one, to answer that very question. And there's been far bigger minds than mine that have looked at it. And the OECD has looked at it as well. They've given recommendations. And we still haven't cracked that egg. I do feel one of the things is that lack of joining up of that workforce pipeline.
Yeah, I was about to state that.
So I think that is one big thing. I think there's also, I think with New Zealand we try and do many things, but don't always do enough things. So from an economy perspective, we are sort of a small to medium-sized economy, and so that means we get benchmarked against the likes of Denmark, Ireland, those sorts of countries. And it's still the case of, what are we doing that we should be doing, and what are we not doing that we should not be doing, and know the difference between the two. The challenge is, again, this is one of my slight, when we do get compared to the likes of some of the smaller European countries, we have the tyranny of distance.
Yeah.
We're a long way from everywhere else.
Yeah.
If you think about food supply chains at the very least, we're an we're a food exporter. We're a fibre exporter. You think about like logs and food and all those sorts of things. And so it is about making sure that whatever we export can survive being on a ship to go up to the major ports, Singapore, etc., versus, hey, it's a quick 2-hour flight to get to the market. So I always feel a little bit, but we're at the end of the world here. Yeah. We've got supply chain complexities that other similar small, medium countries don't face. And so we've got to then build that into our own sort of operating ways of working. So I do feel a little bit unfair sometimes. What else aren't we doing from a productivity perspective? Oh, look, some other research that someone shared with me is that we've got that focus on the 3 Bs, the boat, the batch and the beamer. And then when people achieve that, that's a yay, job done, sit down and put your feet up. Whereas there was a comparison study where Australian people achieved 3 Bs, then they banked it, then they went, well, what's next?
Yeah.
So they looked at that sigmoid curve, that iterative piece of, hungry for what's next. Because, look, I love living in New Zealand. It's an amazing place to live. It's a great place to have a family. But with that necessarily, or maybe not necessarily, but sometimes comes the lack of competition for space. I think when I lived in London, it was a rat race, literally a rat race. Everyone's trying to get from A to B as quickly as they possibly can, and you're trying to find all different ways to get from A to B really, really quickly. In New Zealand, there really is only one way to get from A to B because there's only one road there, really, and it's kind of you just travel at the pace of the person in front of you. Don't go any faster because you can't, and stop fighting it, sort of thing. So, the one thing I do know we need to do better is that pipeline. There's a whole pile of other things, the New Zealand psyche, personality traits.
Yep.
We are different. Geography, we are different.
Yep.
And are we actually comparing ourselves to the right benchmarks? Question mark, don't know.
It's quite interesting. 2022, tech became the second largest export from New Zealand.
Yes.
Not sure if it's still the case with tourism and all that.
Yeah.
If we become number one,
yes,
that supply chain issue, it'll obviously still be there, but not that.
Not so much for a tech piece. Yeah.
Do you think New Zealanders, and this is just opinion, I don't think New Zealanders are ambitious enough.
Reference earlier point, 3 Bs, sit down, put your feet up.
Yep. Not just that, it's also in this day and age with clever finance products, quite quick to attain that.
Yeah.
So I can understand why, I guess we're not that ambitious, but then we've got tall poppy syndrome as well.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, apprenticeships, like you said, the culture that we have over here is that you're frowned upon actually doing something like that. So I'll tell you a little bit about my start of my career in the tech industry. So I've only done 3.5 years of my tech degree. I dropped out. I got lucky, so please don't copy me. I started freelancing.
Yep.
I started coding, and I started working for real companies and doing real projects.
Yep.
Through that, I grew. I wasn't working your normal 40 hours a week. I was pushing out 80.
Yeah.
I was doing 80 hours. I was trying to push as much as I could to learn and really absorb as much as I could. Through that, we, worked hard, got the fruits of working hard, and learnt my code, learnt my trade, and did all that.
Yeah.
A lot of formal education, what I realized wasn't actually required for me to do what I needed to do, because all the coding that I learnt at that time was Objective-C and a bit of Java at the time. It was all learnt from Udemy, YouTube, and then just the people I was working with.
Yep.
And apprenticeship, to me, is something very similar.
Yes.
So I'm very confused as to why it's frowned upon.
So again, taking a step back, my brother in the UK, he saw exactly what you're describing. So he went to university, got his computer science degree, started working for a big consultancy firm in the UK. Accenture, Capgemini, yada yada yada. So probably about 10 years ago, he and his wife decided to sort of do a different pathway. She's a doctor, maybe it's slightly longer than 10 years ago, given that I've been in New Zealand 18 years. Anyway, so he set up this organisation called Digital Natives, which is exactly as you're talking about. It's taking kids from school, 16, saying, don't go to university, don't go and do an IT degree, come into this. It's basically a private training establishment is how we would describe it in New Zealand. And we will give you, you will get that work placement as well as whatever technical qualifications you need. So it's basically a degree apprenticeship for digital.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty much the model that I think we do need here, because you're absolutely right. By the time you've gone through university and studied, technology is moving so fast. You're even leaving university without a date stuff. You need to be learn, apply. You need to be in that workplace. You need to be sort of having a bit of a jam in terms of like, well, how do you make this work? collaborating together on a shared problem, solving problem in real time. And this is where I think those degree apprenticeships, that on the ground learning, you still need to know enough to be dangerous,
Yep.
but not enough to stifle you. And my brother's set up Digital Natives. He's got contracts with the government that they say, right, we need X number of people. Your job is to find the kids and the placements, and make sure they get their qualifications, and they come out at the end of it with a job, because the placement that generally wants to hire them, it's that try before you buy. Yes, well, I've seen you for 3-4 years. You're awesome, and we've invested in you.
Yep.
You don't have that sort of lump of workforces leaving university and then trying to get a job, and then you won't end up with that mismatch of overqualified into roles. So I think degree apprenticeships, that apprenticeship model expanded out beyond it just being perceived as trades. Trades are also, by the way, in extreme short demand. So if you've got a sort of a 16, 17-year-old who's not sure, I'm not sure I want to go to university, tell them to do electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, any of that. They'll never be unemployed. Huge career pathways ahead of them. And actually also some of the data is that financially very, very lucrative because of the sheer shortage of them. Some of them, depending on which industry you get to go into, you get to work shifts. So you can go surfing at 11 o'clock on a whatever day because you're only shift on, shift off. Honestly, we need to have a very different perspective around apprenticeships. And I'd love to put a bomb underneath them and just really make them industry-led, broaden out the qualifications, take the European model. It's working really, really well. The other thing that they do in the UK is they, for every, again, forgive me, don't quite get the details right, every organisation over a certain headcount size has to put, it's either 2% or 0.2% of its total payroll budget, it's collected by Her Majesty Revenue and Customs, into a pot. That pot can only be used for apprenticeships.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's one of those things, well, organisations are going like, we've already paid for it. We might as well then access it back by creating these degree apprenticeship positions and then push them through. So it's one of these things that we can do actually, is use the tax system at a corporate level to create these funds that we then actually give back to organisations to create the roles and the learning pathways that industry needs.
Yeah. Why is it not being done? I guess we can't answer that. It's up to the
That's beyond
politicians.
my pay grade. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess like for those people who don't understand what that means, it's kind of like KiwiSaver, right? Where like our pay goes, I guess 3% of our pay goes, and then of course the company contributes as well.
Yeah.
A similar way the government takes a certain amount of money, and there you go. I guess it's just something that also companies could just look into do without even paying the government for it.
Well, again, they could, and again, it's depending on, goes back to workforce plan. What's the workforce that we need, and how easy is it going to be to get that workforce? If we know, and things like when we redid our apprenticeship strategy, we found things like for a sort of fitter and turner, average time to hire was over 70 days against a sort of backdrop of about 48 days. So they were hard to hire. And then when I went to various industry sectors, working at the employer I did still do, they said, oh, right, you're stealing all of our people because you can put them onto your collective and pay them more than we can. So it became a really competitive, you basically got a small pot that's not enough to fulfill New Zealand's needs. And then it becomes into a competition around, well, who's just going to pay more? Yeah. And so one of the things we looked at was things like time to hire. Time to hire is a really good indication of supply and demand. Yep. Numbers of applicants per role. So if we've got these role vacancies, we might get a small number of applicants versus larger applicants. That tells you, again, what the supply and demand is like. We also looked at our ageing workforce. What percentage of people were age over 60, 65, 70, 75, because you can then predict the retirement age. And basically where we got to was in the next 5 years, and we did this pre-COVID, but in the next 5 years, we're going to have X number of people retiring, and we are currently bringing on Y number of apprentices, assuming that people kind of go through the pipeline. We lose X number of people per year for various different reasons. They want to go to a different organisation, whatever, all goods. We were short by a significant number year on year. So we then went, okay, so we actually need to increase our hiring of apprentices by this number year on year to actually just fulfill our current workforce. Now, what then happened is COVID came and the retirement age became even more of an issue because we weren't allowed to have older people on our sites from a health and safety perspective. Yep. So we're then like, crikey, that accelerated the risks and the issues. And then at that time, the government put in those targeted fees and apprentice funds. And so there's a pot of money available for employers who wanted to increase their apprentices, like, great, ding, 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 jackpot. We need more. We've had this risk highlighted because of older workers not being allowed on site during COVID. We've got this fund, let's go do. And we did. And, you know, workforce crisis averted.
Averted, right. So you mentioned earlier that we've got so our population in terms of newborns or Gen Z is smaller than our baby boomers, right, in New Zealand. So my understanding of that is that 10, 15 years from now, we might have a smaller workforce, assuming immigration doesn't increase or stay at the same rates. A council member, won't name them, said that the IT work sector was developing at speed and only the most motivated workers would keep up. AI was also not helping the situation. It is starting to take jobs away from employees with core skills like coding. It makes it even more important that professionals prioritize self-development and upskill. What are your thoughts on this?
You saw me react to the about taking jobs away. I have quite a different view.
Yep.
So, look, you've basically got four options with AI. So the default scared reaction is companies can do the same with less. You know, we know that productivity and performance can be improved, so great, we don't need X number of people anymore, we can have a Y workforce, great. The next view is you can do more on the same because we've got performance and productivity gains from large language models. So actually we can start getting to all those things that we've not yet been able to. The third option is like a bit of an extension on that. We can do more on the same, but actually start looking 5 years out, 10 years out, you know, be really strategic about what are we going to do with this additional workforce capacity. The fourth perspective, and Bernie Sanders has just put a paper up to the US legislation of going, well, actually, why don't we reset our working hours? So he's got a bill in front of the US Congress to have a 32-hour work week.
Right.
So we've got these opportunities. Same with less, more with the same, more with the same, or a different work week. And I think it is down to organisations to really decide what are we going to do with these performance and productivity gains. There was a paper done by Accenture that did look at those three different options basically, and what they found, again, don't quote me on the exact details, but the gist of it is that organisations took that short-term view of just do the same with less, were actually less well off financially. They didn't get those gains than those organisations that they did more with the same.
Yep.
Because, again, more with the same enables you to really start looking at those game-changing, strategic, tree-planting activities that actually bear fruit. So, again, it depends if organisations are playing the short game or the long game. If you're playing the short game and you just want to cut headcount, they're going to do that.
Yep.
But they will be suffering pretty quickly and over the longer term. I think the interesting piece is that fourth option of how do we use large language models to reset the work, the 40-hour work week, that although we've had COVID and where we work has absolutely shifted. I don't know of anybody that's literally gone back to the office 5 days a week exactly how they were beforehand. Everybody is working differently on various different spectrums. But again, the next piece is how do large language models, how does AI actually reset that 40-hour week expectation that's been around since the Industrial Revolution?
Yep.
Well, we're in the fourth Industrial Revolution. Why are we still taking the second Industrial Revolution as a benchmark, a benchmark for how our work week now needs to get structured?
A small business owner would look at the fourth perspective and go, wait, what? No. How would you, I guess, if you were to, and they say to you, hey, Could you, I guess, make sense of it to me? How would you make sense of it to them?
Yeah. Well, I think the difference, because obviously we know that New Zealand is made up of small, medium enterprises. And the jobs market is very flexy. Right now, we are seeing rising in unemployment. It's gone to 4.3%. 18 months ago, we had, the Great Resignation, and salaries were high because we couldn't get the workforce that we needed. That's generated the immigration boom, and now it's just all sort of rebalancing. I think where you've got competition for talent, it always goes back to supply and demand. So regardless of what the small, medium enterprise is, it's always a case of what's your demand and supply for talent. If you're able to have talent on tap and you don't need to be competitive, then yeah, as an organisation, you can set the ground rules. If you're in an industry where you are struggling for talent, and you are going to have to sort of really work on your employee value proposition to be more attractive, this is where that flexi work week is probably going to be your secret weapon in terms of, hey, we will allow you to use large language models, AI, to be more efficient. Because at the end of the day, it's about outcomes. It's not about inputs.
Yep.
And in the UK and a few other organisations around the world, they've tried the 100-80-100 approach, where you get 100% of the output on 80% of the hours for 100% of the pay.
Right.
Which is not a million miles away from the 32-hour working week that's being proposed. And so as an employee value proposition, if you want that 100-80-100 perspective, it's like, well, can that work? How do you make that work as an employer to actually get your outputs done? And it just requires, again, I say just, it requires a bit of effort to step that through and work through the logistics of like, well, are we all going to be in the office on this day or this day? Because you do need that collaboration, you do need that care, that purpose, that sense of belonging. So it does require more effort in that stand-up and setup of how are we going to make this work. But again, all the evidence so far is that you do get that higher level of engagement, that higher level of productivity. And it's a bit like other organisations that trialled a couple of years ago, unlimited leave.
Yeah.
You've got some different ways of looking at that 40-hour work week, 20 days per leave, 20 days leave per year. Well, one of the beautiful things about technology is it should blow those traditional, sacred cows apart.
Yeah.
And I think the forward-looking organisations will go, all right, the world is changing, we need to change, how do we change? Versus the more staid ones will go like, I'm not changing, I don't need to change. And I think with AI, it's a hop on or get left behind. It's moving so fast.
Yep. And I was about to ask that question too, is it looks like some companies are coming from Excel sheets or even paper to Excel sheets, and the Excel sheets are cloud applications. Now we're saying embrace AI. How do you think small businesses or even startups can start embracing it, start implementing it, and getting them to a state where they can actually make a choice out of those four perspectives?
Yeah. One of my favourite podcasts that I listen to, it's called The AI Breakdown. It's by a guy called Nathaniel Whitmore. And I listen to it every day. It's like 15 minutes, just like sharp hit of what's going on in the world of AI at the moment. So I think first thing is build your own knowledge and capability around what it is and how it works. And there's no shortage of information out there. If you're going from a zero base, just start engaging and learning and finding out what is, if you haven't played with ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or any of the large language models there, just start playing. You'll be amazed. And my 80-year-old dad, bless his comms, where he was talking about he needed some guidance for his fishing club. And I went, Dad, why are you writing this? Have you asked ChatGPT? And he went, oh no, what's this? Over Skype one Sunday morning. Crack open your laptop, Dad, type in this into your search bar. You'll get to ChatGPT 3.5. It's the paid version, but literally just type it in and see what comes back. Like next week, it was amazing. They came up with this list of 12 things. I only had to change one of them. Job done. I was so much quicker. So if my 80-year-old dad, he's not quite 80, he's 80 later on this year. If my 80-year-old dad can lean in and get using ChatGPT, then there's no excuse,
Yeah.
So I think it's first, start playing with it. start growing your own capabilities, start understanding exactly what it is, what it's not. The other piece I think that's really important is to do it safely. Understand if you do put stuff into ChatGPT, where does it go? Yeah. Understand the toggle settings that you can put on to keep your data safe. Understand exactly how it works. You don't need to obviously know the coding, but you need to know exactly so it gets trained on this continuous cycle. So understand what is okay to get uploaded and versus not. Be safe in the world that you're playing in. But just start. And going back to the podcast that I mentioned, one of the things they talked about, so what are the use cases? There aren't any great unicorn use cases just yet. They're coming. It's just a question of when, not if. But a lot of organisations, a lot of people are just doing the bottom up, the organic. Well, I tried it like this, and then I used large language model to do that, and now I'm way, way more efficient. And there was a really nice paper published by Harvard Business late last year. Talked about the jagged frontier, and they took a bunch of consultants, it was like one of the big fours, gave them a whole pile of tasks, and they had 3 conditions: no ChatGPT, ChatGPT, and then sort of trained ChatGPT, as in they were trained on how to prompt engineer, how to use it best. Yep. And surprise, surprise, the group that had the GPT plus the training were more, had increased levels of performance and productivity compared to the control or the playing alone. Although the group that were playing alone, they still had significant improves in performance and productivity. However, the thing is they talk about this jagged frontier. There are certain tasks that were way more efficient, way more effective, and other tasks that weren't. Okay. So I think the other piece is know where it is really, really, really useful, know where it's not. Play with those, don't play with those. I can give you the link if you want that article, because it's a really good place to start. And then it's just understand your use cases, just start playing, almost have a, kitchen meetings, put a plate of sausage rolls in the middle, so who's used ChatGPT this week? How have you used it? What have been the gains? And just start sharing and collaborating on that. Where I do think is, we've got that unicorn breakthrough case any minute now. So if you go back to one of the last big unicorns, it's, mobile phones, mobile data, and out of that, mobile phone and GPS location data, out of that came Uber. And it's now a verb. Yeah. So, the abilities of these large language models, we're just about to have that breakthrough. Oh my goodness me, I can't believe we did this before. How do we do this the old way? It's any minute now, and I can't wait to see what some of the early big unicorn use cases are. But in the meantime, just start that bottom up. Just try it. If you haven't yet played a GPT, just ask it a question. What should I have for dinner tonight? Well, Lynn. Actually, can you please write me a training plan for my daughter's Year 8 netball team? Yes, here it is. Just any question, chuck it in and see what comes out.
Upskilling, I guess, is the best way to think about it and look at it as well. That's becoming a verb too, just GPT it.
Yeah. Uber, Google, GPT it,
Yep. And that could probably solve a bit of our productivity problem, but then
because it's 30%.
You think so? 30% is what it could do.
According to the data, so things like that Harvard Business paper that I talked to, those people that had GPT plus upskilling were both increased performance, they were better at the task, and they were faster, they could do more. About 30% is a general rule of thumb. And even myself, so I'm doing a bit of study at the moment, doing a Masters in Tech Future with Academy EX. Frances Valentine is one of the biggest thought leaders in the country, and she's amazing. So I'm studying, so I'm writing at sort of evenings and weekends, and it's a case of using that in my study. So I did a Masters 20 years ago. I'm doing a Masters again now, and just the shifts in AI productivity from writing 25,000 words this time to writing what will probably be close to 40,000 words this time. It's things like, so you do your academic literature search through your typical databases, then you find one paper that, that's the really good paper, upload that to Research Rabbit, click the button that says find similar papers, and bingo, the find similar papers is there. So your body of knowledge is there in front of you. You then sort of ask Perplexity for a bit of a summary. There'll be still some that you need to read deeply and deeply understand, but you can cover much more breadth by asking things like Perplexity, give me a summary of this, pros and cons, gaps in this paper. Then when you actually get to writing and pulling together all your ideas, and I think you still need that sort of writing, that synthesis of ideas, then I literally get my key bullet points down, upload that into ChatGPT. Please improve this paragraph suitable for a level 9 master's thesis. And I would have spent 25 minutes tidying that paragraph off with like a couple of hundred words. Bingo, thank you, it's done in 2 seconds flat. Put that back in. Keep a record of everything that I've changed from an ethics perspective. So if my supervisor wants to know, well, how much did you write? How much did GPT? Well, here's what I wrote, and then here's how GPT improved it and made it a lot more like tidier.
Yeah.
Saved me like 20 minutes each paragraph. And then there's things like referencing, the plugins that you can do there. And then there's also when I'm doing my research. So I, record using Teams or Otter AI, get them to do the thematic analysis or the transcription, whereas last time I literally had to type all the ones out. So I'm just able to go far broader. I'm far more productive now than I was 20 years ago.
Or even, say, a year ago as well.
Even a year ago, yeah.
But having saying that, so we expect New Zealand, so suppose New Zealand does adopt GPT and all these AI technologies. And we do increase our productivity by 30%, 34.2 hours increases. But because this is a global tool.
Rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah, so then I guess it's just a disclaimer in the sense that, like, okay, if New Zealand does adopt it, the quicker we adopt it, the better.
Yep.
Because that would be our way to get ahead of other countries or at least meet them.
Yeah.
But coming back to, I guess, another question, which is not so much people related. How do you manage your time? How do you do all this? I'm studying, researching, playing around with all this, and of course you mentioned right now you've got kids as well, so
yeah.
And then working as well. Like how do you do this?
Evenings and weekends is when I study.
Right. And then how do you? I guess, like for me, it's like all right, telling.
I don't watch a lot of telly.
Yeah, that's one good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I also so I'm a runner, like a half-distance marathon runner. So I listen to podcasts when I'm running. Or when I'm driving in the car. So almost every minute that I've got is kind of like, well, how can I do at least 2 tasks at the same time? So I'm exercising and I'm learning.
Yep.
Or I'm in the car and I'm making calls safely, hands-free, etc. So I try and dual task as much as I can. To be fair, when I decided to take on this extra study, I did sit down with my husband and the kids and saying, hey, I want to do this. What it does mean that I'm going to be disappearing into the study evenings and weekends, and there'll be certain things that I won't be able to do that I need you to step up, and this has to be a whole family agreement.
Yeah.
And they went, yeah, no, it's good. All go do it, Mum. Because it's also about, from my own personal perspective, how do I help keep up to date and current? I did a master's 20 years ago. If I go back to that Singapore example, I'd be eligible because I haven't. It's been 20 years since I did any postgrad study myself. You should keep yourself up to date and current. And the masters that I'm doing is pretty fabulous. Small plug for Academy EX Masters of Tech Futures. It's certainly blowing my mind in many, many different ways. And I mean, even before then, I was sort of podcast reader, listener, but now it's applied. Now it's got to be something practical. It's got to be something that's going to hopefully shape and help wider New Zealand. So, how do I do it? Evenings, weekends.
Great as well, I guess. And then would it be discipline as well, like with your timings?
Yeah, just got to get stuff done.
For those people, I guess, it's my understanding is that you've taken all this on board and you understand your own boundaries and how much energy you have and you're managing it quite well, because you seem, to be completely by this assumption, maybe I'm wrong. For those people who...
I'm really only 27. This haggard face tells you why.
I don't see anything. You look 27. Sorry, back to that. So for those people who end up taking a bit too much, maybe they overestimate what they can actually handle. Burnout. What advice would you have for, I guess, some people who overestimate their capacity or they just get shoved into overdoing?
Well, I think it comes back to, first of all, know yourself. Knowing what you can do, knowing what you can't do, and really understanding how far you can push yourself. I mean, what I do know is this isn't forever. This is going to be a defined period of time whilst I'm studying. It's not like I'm taking on a 5-year course. It's like an 18-month program. So it's got to be defined. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. I'm in the middle of it at the moment, but I know that it will. This too shall come to an end. Second piece is find the hacks. Where you can do two things at the same time. You'll find a way. I think something else is also to watch out for signs of burnout. Know when to push and know when to pull back. Because if you keep on pushing and not listening to the signs, then that is going to ultimately make you fall over. And there's been several cases of where people haven't listened to that, so it's understand the pull and the push. I think the other piece is if you are doing study, do it with an organisation that understands that you have busy lives. The place that I'm studying, Academy X, they always say, we know you've got busy lives. If you need an extension, ask.
Yep.
Come to us early, have these conversations, help us, manage your workload. Don't kill yourself, because we want you to get through this. We don't want you to drop out. We don't want you to kill yourself. So let's play the long game here. And I think that's the same with organisations as well. Play the long game. Invest in people where you need to invest in them. Give them the space to do what they need to do. Also, my boss has been incredibly supportive of giving me the time to study when I've needed to be at uni. Those sorts of things as well. But it's I guess some of it is, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah.
And that includes things like study time from your employer, extensions from your assessments, but just communicate early. So with my supervisor, it's a case of I need an extra 24 hours. Can I have that? Yeah, of course you can. Just submit what you've got now into the learning management system. Email me the finished version 24 hours later, and I'll just mark that version. All good.
Yep.
Sweet.
Yep.
Yeah, have the conversation you need to have.
Oh, yeah. Great advice. Great advice. Lynne, thank you so much for doing this. It's very clear what your passion is for people. I'm inspired by what you're doing. And I think I'll probably go home and reflect on a couple of things as well. Like you mentioned, doing two things at once. When you're cleaning, maybe put a podcast on. When you're driving, try and do calls. I mean, I do calls while driving. Sometimes not the most best way.
And it depends on the call you're in. Where do you need to be present for and when you don't need to be present for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, again, thank you so much for this. It's been honestly a great chat. I've learned a lot. And if not that, this conversation is probably going to help shape my future as well. I'm sure listeners as well.